Hello and welcome to Impera Project, a project built on a dream. Long time no see, dear philosophy enthusiasts, rest assured, for we did not die. The events of recent months required us to take a small vacation and ponder upon the current world affairs, and to give our contribution in real life rather than online. There will be some videos about the warmest subjects in the near future, so stay tuned. Last time we talked, our country, Romania, was in the flames and almost ready to collapse under the burden of a presidential crisis which reeked of misinformation and foreign intervention. But we managed to escape that, and now our country is still in flames, but they are smaller and more manageable. But what happened recently piqued our interest in a discussion we haven't had in quite a while. The recent events and the rise of the conservatism and far-right parties made us question one thing. On whose side is the church? We know it might sound like a stupid question because we all know the answer, but this led to a more interesting dilemma. Can we make an atheist society? Would it be viable long term, and if truly so, then how should we approach this endeavor? This video is based upon a very interesting discussion with a dear friend of ours about methods in which a government can cut out the meddling of religious entities from state affairs. These are the questions, our dear philosophy enthusiasts, and now it's time to put on our thinking hats and light our tobacco of choice and think about it. But before we start this video, don't forget to leave a like, share and subscribe to Impera Project for more videos in which we delve straight into deep topics and sometimes unpleasant conversations. Thank you very much for your time, and now without any further delay, let's begin. If you are a long-term subscriber of Impera Project, you might know that we are atheists. Not anti-theists, but anti-religious institutions and completely opposed to those said institutions having any sort of political or economical power. In other words, the churches must be just a symbol and not be allowed any sayings in state affairs. The religious institutions should not be allowed to take any stance on social rights, geopolitical events, and should not be allowed to favor any political party. In this video we will talk about a multitude of reforms which should be applied in order to reduce the institutional power of religious entities. We will use as an example our own country, but we think that many of these reforms can be successfully implemented in countries which don't already have them. We will use Christianity and its denominations as the usual suspects, but these reforms can be applied to the other two Abrahamic religions just as well. The reason behind this choice is simple. Christianity, especially Orthodoxy, is the religion in which we have the most knowledge. These reforms cannot be used against Asian religions such as Buddhism or Confucianism, as we personally do not consider them dangerous for the human mind, as their philosophical part is just as strong as their spiritual one. As for Hinduism and or other polytheist religions such as Shinto, we do not have the required knowledge in order to express an opinion on them, so they get a free pass, for now. With these small annotations out of the way, let's come back to our question: is it possible to create an atheist society? The answer depends on how one envisions an atheist society in the first place. If you imagine it as a state in which every single individual is an atheist, the answer is a clear no. In this video we will start on the assumption that you cannot change deeply rooted beliefs such as religious views and or political ones, and neither should you try. There have been many episodes in history in which people try to change one's ideas by force, and this is by no means acceptable. Trying to change someone's ideas through force is barbaric and, cynically speaking, counterproductive, especially when it comes to religion. Punitive measures breed martyrs, and martyrdom is a key feature of Abrahamic religions, especially Christianity. This would only increase the power and fervor and accentuate religious radicalization instead of curbing it. So we cannot use force and or punitive measures, but we think that if the influence of religious entities is reduced enough, the human mind will forget about them or not actively take religion into consideration when making choices. This is what we will focus on in this video: how to reduce the influence of religious institutions to mere symbolic value. By symbolic value we mean that churches, synagogues or mosques should exist as cultural artifacts, historical attractions, and only as places of personal worship, but not as agents of policy, lawmaking, or state funding. This is pretty much the main pillar of a secular state. We know from our history that the church had an insane amount of political power during the Middle Ages, from crowning monarchs, starting with Charlemagne and ending with Napoleon, to excommunicating people or even states, and even having its own enforcers in the Inquisition. At its very core, this separation means that religious institutions should not be allowed to influence governments, and governments should not interfere in religious affairs. The problem is that at certain points these two entities are not respecting this non-aggression pact. Sure, there have been many instances in which the state broke the pact, such as in communist states, but nowadays we think it's the other way around, just like in the Middle Ages. Of course, nobody is burning and no one at the stake, that's something, but the religious institutions actively undermine the authority of the state. We would go as far as to say that religious entities created their own alternative state. Religious institutions hold land, influence over education, media outlets, and political alliances. In essence, they have the infrastructure of a mini-state, but one that's unelected, unaccountable, and overzealous. From shady NGOs or lobbying organizations which pressure the state to abolish certain rights, the right to abortion is a good example, to active members of the church who campaign for right-wing politicians and fascist organizations. This happened in the USA, in Romania, and is probably going to happen in many other places, or it already happens. So, how should we approach it? There are a couple of solutions that come on top of our minds. Firstly, all religious symbols should be removed and forbidden from public institutions and from public spaces. An exception can be the cross on top of the church, for example, but no other cross anywhere in public. This extends to people. No religious garment and/or symbol should be allowed in public. An exception can be if it's hidden from view, such as a cross necklace under the clothes. We come back to our idea that there must be no brutality, so if one is found having a religious symbol in a public institution, he or she can be escorted out and returned when it respects the law. In extreme cases, that symbol should just be confiscated by the police officers. So no institutional religious symbols in state-run facilities, schools, courthouses, parliaments, yes, let's just stop swearing on the Bible, and so on. Next thing, all state funding and tax exemptions for religious organizations should be banned. No public funding should go to religious buildings or projects, no matter if it's the state's official religion or another one. Everything should be done by themselves as separate entities. And you'll probably say, but if they receive money from private sponsors, doesn't that ensure the risk of those said religious institutions to favor the wishes of those sponsors and not those of the people? This already happens with donations from rich and powerful people to different kinds of cults and alternative religious doctrines. What the state can do is force those entities to fully and publicly disclose the names of every single individual and/or company who donated and the sum itself. In this way, the state can follow the money and perhaps discover in the process some really shady affairs. This should make all funding for religious entities completely transparent and protect the state and its people from abuse. Some of you might say that we are giving too much power to the state and this might turn the situation into religious persecution. Well, not quite. Indeed, the state shouldn't care if you yourself donated €1 to a certain parish, let's say, or if you paid what you are due to that parish. But the state should know exactly how much money comes from paying the dues and how much money comes from small donations, and everything about donations that exceed a certain sum. To summarize, all religious institutions should be legally required to publicly disclose the names of every single individual who donates a sum that exceeds a certain threshold, the exact amount donated, and the purpose of the donation, if specified. The state should not care if you make a donation or light a candle for your grandmother. Of course, if the church sells the candle, it should be taxed like any other item. The state must know How much revenue is generated through dues or tithe systems? How many donations come from everyday citizens, and who exactly is donating large sums? This should be taken extremely seriously for NGOs, especially those with foreign backing, and cults, especially newer kinds of cults. Transparency isn't persecution, it's protection of the people, of democracy, and of the integrity of public discourse. Next on the list is the secularization of monastic wealth. But this will have a special separate video because it is a really interesting reform that requires a lot of explaining and a lot of discussion. Patience, young ones. So let's skip this part for now. Another crucial point would be ensuring that political leaders and influential individuals do not invoke religion in policymaking. Once the name of a god appears as reasoning or justification for a policy or law, the discussion ends there, and the political figure which made that declaration should submit his or her resignation later. Of course, they won't have the dignity to do that, so the electorate should immediately ask for the resignation. We have already seen in our own country that someone can pretend to be sent by God and even win the first round of elections without any sanction. So not only is one that pretends to have talked with God not punished by the electorate for this abnormal statement, he is rewarded, which says a lot about critical thinking and how religion has clouded the judgment of the common folk. This also happened in America.
I believe that my life was saved that day in Butler for a very good reason. I was saved by God to make America great again.
This is not something that should happen in a sane society. It is not normal, it is not sane, and it is not tolerable. We talked to religious people in our circle. Yes, there are some of those as well, and they are quite reasonable folk. And we came to one conclusion. This is a new peak for hypocrisy. They said that the name of God does not belong in politics and it is blasphemy to pretend to be sent by God. And we said that it is simply embarrassing to pretend to be sent by something that does not exist. A consensus was born that day. So, good job, you made the atheist and the religious to shake their hands in friendship. This kind of rhetoric feeds religious turmoil. It feeds radicalization and takes advantage of the poor and uneducated, which is morally questionable if not entirely wrong. More than so, building your political strategy on religious affirmation feeds fascist movements, especially in countries like Romania, where religion and the far right used to be, and apparently still are, best friends. We know that the dignity required to step down after such a stupid statement doesn't usually come bundled with divine revelation, but the public should demand resignation and expel from public life every single individual who uses religious rhetoric, religious arguments or doctrines as platform for political influence or policy making. To us, it matters not if it's the president, the prime minister, or the manager of some state company. Once the name of any god is the foundation for a decision, it ends there, and no exception should be tolerated. School is generally good. Stay in school, kids. It teaches you a lot of things and puts the basis for you to obtain advanced knowledge later on. Schools, universities, and other forms of education should be places of enlightenment and by no means places of worship or religious indoctrination. This pairs well with the removal of religious symbols from public institutions. There should be no icons, no crosses, and no religious garments in schools. We know that France banned hijabs in schools, and that's a sensible and correct approach. Your religious background should matter not in education, nor should one receive any special treatment, pauses for praying as an example. We can make an exception for food. If your religion doesn't allow the consumption of certain foods, then we can agree that the school should take this into consideration when deciding what to serve at the cantina. Other than that, no money or time-consuming actions should be taken, so no hand-sacrifice creatures or other funny stuff. The reverse works as well. No one should be judged based on religion in schools. When one enters the school's premises, his or her religion should be left outside. The teachers should not make any sort of religious comments and should not express any religious opinions as if religion did not exist. The school should promote critical thinking, a thing which it does not. A greater emphasis should be put on the teachings of mathematics, physics, biology, and of course Enlightenment through philosophy, logic, and the history of religions. In Romania, kids study religion, the Orthodox cult, obviously. Of course, they can opt out. We did it as well in high school, obviously invoking the fact that we are atheists. Nobody is going to force you, which is great. The religion teachers we had were pretty reasonable folk, and nobody judged us for this, nor for not praying. But we would go a step further. Religion should be replaced with the history of religions, a class in which every single religion since ancient times should be studied in accordance with the history class. A kind of synchronization between the two. No prayers, no rites, just them presented as information. This should serve as a way to make the children understand that there are different points of view, different perspectives, and through comparative analysis, they will understand that all religions are fundamentally the same color, different shade. Secondly, schools should promote science literacy. This means that schools should only teach and promote evidence-based facts and to put greater emphasis on the scientific method, to promote knowledge over belief and to do its best to destroy myths and conspiracy theories. If there is objective good in a religious practice, such as fasting or meditation, then the school should explain scientifically why that practice is good. We have gotten really tired about conspiracy theories surrounding vaccines, for example, and at this point, if there were a referendum to make them mandatory, we would probably vote yes. Some people's lack of knowledge or willingness to listen to reason is putting too many innocent people in danger. The code of conduct inside schools should be based upon secular ethics. We've presented on this channel the three main normative theories that are the basis of Western moral views. The school should teach children that religion is just one system of values and not the only one. A greater emphasis should be put on teaching morality without the notion of divine interference or punishment. Theories such as the Kantian ethics or the Utilitarianism of Jeremy Bentham should be presented according to the age of the children. For example, treat others the way you want to be treated. This way, the educational system promotes empathy, understanding, and removes terrible and vitiated concepts such as sin, punishment, hell, and other abominations created by the human mind in moments of lesser lucidity. So, let's bring it all together. We don't seek to erase religion from people's lives. We are not interested in policing private beliefs, rituals, or spiritual practices. What we are interested in, and what we've argued throughout this video, is the complete separation of religions, institutions from the machinery of the state. Religious entities must be reduced to symbolic relevance only, no influence over law, no say in public education, no interference in policy making, and certainly no access to public funding. They must operate as private, transparent, self-sustaining institutions bound by the same laws and expectations as any other non-governmental entity. Why? Because when religious institutions gain political and economical power, history has shown us that they will use it to impose their doctrine, limit personal freedoms, and subvert democratic processes. A free and guided by reason society cannot afford to let that happen. We must build a system in which morality is taught without fear, decisions are made through reason, and the public sphere belongs to all citizens, not to those who claim divine authority. This video is already long enough, but we managed to cover only 2 out of the almost 10 types of reforms we managed to formulate. The whole discussion with that said friend of ours lasted for 6 full hours. And what you see here is just a summary. We think we should make a series about this and we would like to know your opinion. Would you watch a guide on how to build an atheist society? Leave a comment down below. As always, we thank you for your time, and if you enjoy our content, don't forget to leave a like, share and subscribe to Impera Project, and we will gladly see you next time.